Welcome to Professor's Corner. I'm joined with Melissa, and we're having a conversation about the moral foundations of liberalism, or perhaps what we might call multicultural liberalism, the new liberalism that has emerged. And we're going to be taking a look at it more in detail. Why don't you join us in the conversation?
So to kick us off in this discussion, I'm wondering, can a common morality emerge out of a diversity of human interests?
That, I think, is the biggest issue that the Romantic humanist, that subjectivism within humanism, within liberalism, has to answer. And so we're going to look at the way it's proposed. And I might add, in case I forget to emphasize this, I think, is the air we breathe. This scheme that we're going to talk about now, it's built up from scientific or rationalistic liberalism and Romantic liberalism. They're trying to bring together the hybrid.
Okay.
And you will see this in public policy, and you have to be able to, as an evangelical, recognize it and disaggregate it in order to criticize it.
Okay.
Okay, so let's take a look. The first thing, you'll remember the public-private?
Yes.
Well, this, make a couple comments, and then we'll look at a diagram. How about that?
Okay, great.
So it's built up of two tiers.
Okay.
This isn't unlike the public-private circles that we saw before. Now the difference is going to be is that the basic common morality is really the rationalistic pole, and what we're going to be calling the realm of personal ideals, or the ethical realm, that's going to be the concession to Romanticism. So there are two tiers. There is a region of the ethical, that's the how shall I live, and there's the sphere of morality. And the important thing, I think, to recognize, as you're going to see in this diagram, well, let's just take a look at the diagram and talk it through from there. You'll see, notice the first thing is the basic social morality is much smaller.
Yes.
And that's I'm trying to communicate that the social morality is the least important to the mind of the, I'm just going to call it new liberalism.
Okay.
But if you want to call it multicultural liberalism, that's fine as well. But the idea here is you only want a minimal morality, only what is necessary in order to adjudicate.
So you're kind of conceding to the Romantics in this regard, that most of it's going to be individual, and there's just going to be a little bit that's common.
Right, and we'll talk about that a little, of what is common. But you're right. The large part of the circle here you see is a concession to the Romanticism, the subjectivity, because that's where freedom is, and it's the creation. The rest is conforming to a set of principles and rules. How large, how small this little circle is really where the debate is going on.
Okay.
I might add that the border around the basic social, trying to emphasize that, it may not come through. That is these realms are sharply distinguished by the fact-value dichotomy, so that everything out in this outer circle is referred to as sort of ideal pictures of life, personal ideals. It's the realm in which there are, as it's oftentimes said, many truths but no truth. This realm out here does not admit of being truth or false. It's non-rational in that regard. The only thing that can be rational is this minimal circle. Mm-hmm. Now, you might ask the question, how do we justify the basic social morality? And that's going to be back to earlier in our discussion about that a morality is necessary for the existence of society.
Yes.
And we said there were two interpretations of that. It could be any morality is necessary, or a morality.
Particular morality.
That is the debate within liberalism, a particular versus any.
Well, here's what I want to know. What goes in that circle? What are a few of the items that fit there?
Okay, so we call these the platitudes of practical reason. Actually, Basil Mitchell, and we're using his work here. I'm summarizing his work.
Okay.
I think it's chapter 4 in the book.
Yes, sounds right.
And he got this term from C.S. Lewis. But at any rate, it's this idea that we have sort of these very abstract ideas, and for example, mutual aid.
Yes.
Abstention from injury, some sense of honesty, some abstract notion of justice maybe being reciprocity or some equality, but there's no content, and that's the important thing.
So be fair, help people, don't harm people, and tell the truth. whatever that means to you.
Yeah.
These are what are going in the little circle.
Exactly right.
Okay.
Now, in our presentation, The Frontiers of Theological Ethics, we talk about the idea that the content of these platitudes come from either biblical revelation, or they come from culture, or from experience, or a combination.
Okay.
And that, interestingly enough, this inner circle, I'm switching back to our diagram, is usually, not only is it justified sort of on pragmatic grounds, and that would be probably true for a Christian as well as a secular person, but also that the way, and this was where the difference internally, the way in which decisions get made in this circle be utilitarian, and that's where you can get into some real controversy real quick. But the predominant theme is that there is this very large outer circle and this inner circle. The judgments that get made internal to it are done on utilitarian grounds, just like the rational humanist.
How does the outer circle work? I mean, what are some of the personal ideals, and how does that play out?
I've already mentioned this is the realm in which there are many truths but no truth.
Yes.
Right? And this is where people make for themselves. This is they choose a principle by which to live with, and if they don't like it, they will give it up and live by something else. And there's no way to judge what one chooses in this outer realm.
The only way you would is if it came in conflict with one of the other four
and then the
big ones.
And the utilitarian calculus of the basic would adjudicate between the conflicts in this outer realm. And if you think about this as a quick illustration, on the university campus, we're hearing about safe places. This is what this multicultural scheme produces. The view we're going to argue for is that there is a way to rationally assess between ideals. This is a different conception of liberal society, and that's what creates the tension that's going on that you see right now. Some will call it progressive, some will call it conservative. It's really rival schemes of what the liberal society really is.
So if we had to sum it up, what would you say is the big idea of this new liberalism?
I'm going to give you a quote.
Okay.
I'm not going to read it, but you can read this at your leisure. But the idea here really is that you are a type of person that is prepared to live in a society where there are multiple ideals around you, and that you enjoy that even though you don't embrace anything other than your own. And the slogan that you sometimes hear is, you're free to hold whatever beliefs as long as you don't impose them on somebody else. This is the type of person that is, well, as Strauss, and I'm taking it from here, said, what will the attitude be of a person that experiences in a liberal society? Well, there'll be a person that experiences sympathy for a variety of conflicting ideals of life.
Okay.
And they would see themselves as another important, a sympathetic, though, enemy of all those who want to impose their will upon the basic social morality.
Okay.
We heard this a lot in debates where we hear on the pro-life debate, don't impose you're free to believe what you want, but don't impose it.
You know, it's interesting to me. It sounds like for a philosophy that says that people, or for this new liberalism seems to say that you have a lot of freedom, and yet I'm actually hearing that maybe this new liberalism may prescribe some of its own
I got it.
ideas or something.
They seem almost to contradict their view of tolerance has changed. The idea here is, in this outer circle, since there's no truth, but many truths but no truth.
Right.
Our language, ordinary language, of the positivist, de facto positivist morality, is such that it implies that there's an objectivity, that there's a truth to the matter, and therefore what some people believe may be wrong. And so in this realm of that, they want to sort of say, hey, there's no objectivity, there's no truth. So when somebody's being politically correct, what they're being asked to do is apologize for believing in truth.
Right.
So
and that can be difficult.
It's difficult. And that's why the people want to make these safe spaces, because if there is no truth and our language still sort of conveys that there's a truth to the matter, then people feel like they're guilty or something, and you want to create a place where that literally can't happen.
Right. I'm getting the sense that all social morality, you need some sort of content to be part of it. So can you talk?
Yeah, that's
explain that a little bit?
If our platitudes are very abstract, and if there's a general agreement, then how do we get how do we get from a primitive notion of justice, sort of equality or reciprocity, to some very developed theory of social justice, of redistribution of wealth, or in some conservative circles, how do they get to the idea of economic justice?
Okay.
So I think that those are built up by a variety of reason or experience or revelation. Christians will have interpreted these platitudes. They're moral intuitions that we hold that we have to give content to. And it comes over hundreds and hundreds of years that develops. And sometimes we receive it and then as a tradition, and sometimes it becomes part of culture.
Right, and sort of, is ingested just because it's part of what the air we breathe, what we're
That's
talking
right.
to, right? Which is why I'll sometimes catch myself saying things that I'm just hearing and picking up, and I'm not necessarily, don't even always fully appreciate what I am saying or articulating. What about this idea of moral pluralism?
Well, if we understand, the first is, let's look at two moves here. One is a minimalist move that we've been describing. And as you pointed out, it seems like there needs to be content around these very minimal. Incidentally, the 4 I gave you about truth and honesty, that's really about all there is.
Right. It's pretty slim.
It's pretty skimpy.
Right.
And most everybody wants to reduce it to harm. And that's what I mean by the minimalist. So you take concepts, and we're going to look at one like adultery, and it gets reduced to simply areas of what causes harm. And so the Christian has something different in mind with that concept, and the multicultural liberal will purge some of those meanings down to some minimal set of behaviors. But so there's this minimal position, but most people acknowledge that some content's necessary, and they realize that it's controversial.
Right.
If the ideal of having this social morality was non-controversial, but it doesn't have the content, and they have to read it as content, you have a problem in its coherence. You have to go to the outer circle to bring back, as it were, content to embellish these platitudes of practical reason, because you can't do much with them in and of themselves.
It sounds like you're moving us into a little bit, if I'm hearing correctly, that there actually are some ways that we can deconstruct or even potentially be a little bit critical of this new liberalism.
It is. And the first is recognize the minimal morality, and then we have a set of arguments that we can use against that. We begin by showing the incoherence by saying, hey, if you want to change the institution of marriage, by what social ideal are you going to make that change? And what is going to be the rational criteria? Because if you're pulling from the outer circle of the realm of where there's no truth, then you are in effect discriminating against other people. And so that scheme of minimalism may not work. In fact, Mitchell argued that it was incoherent. The alternative is say, well, maybe we can give a little bit of content, it can be a little bit of controversy, and that's where the pluralism comes in, where you can have you can allow for different types of morality. They can have a different type of content, and the idea is that these can coexist. But the problem of it is you still have to have a morality, because if you think about it, you have a variety of things that happen in sub-communities of morality. Like you're going to have, let's say, for example,
communities that allow for cannibalism, for example, or behaviors
Islam,
that are unusual.
Sharia law versus Western civil law.
Sure, right.
So how is this going to work out? What are you going to do in certain views that may have different views of human rights, where women are discriminated against,
right.
Where children are treated differently, where animals are treated, this kind of thing. And so the liberal has to decide, how am I going to handle these things?
Sure, they do.
And the whole idea about pluralism, again,
right.
is it doesn't come with a set of transcendent values. In fact, the idea of neutrality of the state is to allow these pluralisms, but they then still have to step in and adjudicate between, this is what I think concerns people with religious liberty. Now that you have the Supreme Court saying that there's gay marriage,
right.
that's constitutional,
right.
Now what happens within a church?
Right.
Okay, so the liberal, right now people saying, oh, we'll never bother the church, but it's not part of the disposition of the liberal, because the liberal looks out at any of these sub-communities where there's non-liberal
right.
things going on according to their value system, and they feel they need to step in and correct that.
Right.
And that's the problem that pluralism has. So you don't get away from the same arguments of incoherence by shifting and allowing a little more content in and going to pluralism.
I think I'm getting a sense about what this new liberalism is, but sort of, I realize closing out this conversation, how as a Christian can I respond? Can you give me a couple practical ways?
Well, the policy specialist is going to have to deconstruct it. I've put together some steps that we're going to work in. We'll spend some time in further classes doing this, but first you have to distinguish the rational and the romantic realm.
Yes, we've done that. We've been working on that.
You'll work from Mitchell and other readings to sort of develop some argument, to identify and to critique individual components. Then you want to begin to describe, given the issue, what sort of minimal value are they dealing with? Is it mutual aid? Is it honesty? What is it? You want to identify that. And then in your third step, you want to see how they're bringing in content to this. Are they coming from some social ideal or not?
Okay.
If they are, we're going to block it.
Okay.
Okay. That's my problem with gay marriage.
Right.
Is that what type of social ideal of the institution do you want? And once we've sort of done that step, then a fourth step would be to show that what you brought is not neutral. And the way I do that is to take different utilitarian theories or different deological theories and I pit them against one another.
Right.
To show that there's a controversy about what they hold.
Right.
So that it makes it clear that there is a multiple different views in terms of this, trying to decide what this basic social morality is going to be.
And then I would imagine as a Christian, you've got to present your view in a way that people can digest.
Yeah.
And then you've got to make the argument that your view is actually a strong candidate for their consideration.
Exactly.
Which is going to require you to have biblical evidence, and also you're going to have to think from the mindset of the other person. I'm looking forward to talking about that more.
That's what we're going to do.